Welcome back to the, I guess the final technical video for the Trinity Amps Triwatt build. I have now resolved the issues with the self-oscillation in the overdrive. Also regarding that, I spent some significant time today figuring out where that humming was coming from. So when we do the playing today, that hum will be gone, I'm happy to say. So the last thing I have to do before I start doing the features review and shootouts, you know, all of the things I'm going to do with the Triwatt over in the studio, get some better tones and things. The last sort of technical thing I have to do is calibrate the effects loop. As I said, I was getting some hum from that initially, or some hiss from that initially, and it was kind of bothering me. After I did the playthrough video, I realized that I had misunderstood how they wanted it set up, or how they recommended to set that effects loop up. So I think my problems are not really too deep on this. I just need to set the send level, return level, get everything so that it's not clipping when we put effects in the loop. This is not what you would call a passive effects loop, so it's not just breaking the signal between the preamp section and master section and just inserting you know, your effects in a line there. This is actually a buffered series effects loop with independent send and return controls on it, and that lets you calibrate this for the various levels the effects you might be inserting into that loop would be expecting. Generally there will be three scenarios that you will want to calibrate the effects loop for. One would be using pro level effects units, things you would normally see in a studio, things that are expecting a plus 4 dBu input level. So that would be one scenario. Another scenario would be consumer level devices that are expecting somewhat smaller input signal, minus 10 dBV. Does anybody have an aspirin? And then of course for all us guitar players, we might want to put our favorite pedal in that loop. So we'll be looking at instrument level. Whiskey? Anybody have whiskey? They're designed to take a very small signal in. So with the effects loop, we need to adjust our send signals into the effects loop that we are using so that it's got the appropriate level coming in, so that it's not clipping and kind of making the signal sound ugly. That would kind of tend to happen more if you're using a guitar pedal in there, or conversely, where you're not sending enough signal into the effect. It'll still work, but you're going to get a very noisy, very quiet signal out of it. So you want to set your levels appropriately. Being that this is a guitar amp, and many of you watching are probably guitar players and maybe considering building your own amp, or even just installing an effects loop into your amp. By the way, Trinity Amps sells this effects loop board separately, so you could actually buy this board from them, and it's not too expensive, and put that in virtually any amp you have. So this isn't just specific to Trinity or the Triwatt. So being that most of us are guitar players, I'm making that assumption because this is a guitar amp and guitar players would probably be quite interested in this more than a lot of other people. I'm going to do the demonstration today setting this up to work with a standard guitar pedal. Since you probably are thinking, well, hey, you know, I've got this great pedal reverb or pedal delay, or maybe a guitar multi-effects pedal, and it would be awesome to have it in the effects loop. So generally any of the pedals, and even a lot of the multi-effects units that are built specifically for guitar, we'll be expecting an instrument level input. Some of them, such as the Line 6 HX effects, you know, various other multi-effects units like that are a little more high-end have switchable, so they can accept line or instrument level. But I think overall it makes the most sense just to demonstrate this as if you were using a device that's expecting instrument level. So something like a pedal delay. This is a TC the Prophet digital delay. I really like this delay. I don't use it so much anymore because I've got my HX effects and it has great delays in it. But this is a really nice sounding delay unit, really warm. Kind of surprised. I'm not a big fan of digital delay because it's usually a little bit too crisp. This is a really nice round warm sounding pedal. So I'm going to demonstrate setting the loop up to work with just this guitar pedal. Talking about the different levels, okay, we've talked about plus 4 dBu pro level, minus 10 dBV consumer line level, and instrument level. There are two other levels, which are mic level. Mic level is the lowest input signal level and doesn't really apply to what we're doing today with this amp. I'm not planning on running a microphone through this amp, and a lot of other people probably aren't either, unless you're a harmonica player, and you probably wouldn't use something like the Triwatt for that anyway. So we're not going to talk about mic level or speaker level. We're not doing anything that's with this effects loop that's going to require a speaker level. You actually couldn't do that with this effects loop. So we're just going to deal with, like I say, instrument level. If you were, though, wanting to set up a studio effects unit to work in the loop of this, the procedure is the same as I'm going to show you. You just would use a more robust or a higher send level. So just to kind of lay that out a bit, generally what you want to do, no matter what you're putting in the effects loop, you want to have the send level as high as you can get it without clipping. And then you adjust the return level so that the overall sound, when the loop is active, you want the level to be very close, if not exactly the same as when you bypass the effects loop. There is a bypass switch on the loop to make it easy to check how you've got that level set. And what you want is, you don't want your effects to be boosting your signal or putting out a lower signal. Yes, you might want to put an effect such as a boost pedal in your loop so that you can turn it on and get a solo boost. But for things like delays and reverbs and chorus, flanger, those sorts of things that you might put in this effects loop, when you engage them, you don't want your guitar volume to jump or drop. So you want to balance your levels so that the send is not clipping the input of the effects unit or causing the effects unit to clip on the return. And then you want to adjust your return level so that when the effect is active, when the loop is active, your levels are similar to when it's not active. So that's what we're doing today. I'm going to start by showing you how to set this up the amp tech way, which is using a signal generator to the input and using a scope to check your various levels at those points, how robust your signal is going into the amp, then what that signal level is before the input to the effects loop, check the level on the send, and then check the level after you return to see that everything's, first of all, you're still getting a clean signal all the way through, and to see that you're not really jumping the level up when the loop is engaged. So for this part of the tweaking, the calibrating for the effects loop, I'm going to show you the tech way to do it. Back in the day, the amp tech, the tech you would take your amp to be worked on, he probably wasn't a musician or a player. He probably was just a TV or radio serviceman. So the way he would check it was he would input a signal, usually a 1 kilohertz sine wave, and usually about 500 millivolts peak to peak, into the front of the amp. 500 millivolt peak to peak signal is roughly equivalent to what your average humbucker output level is. And then he would scope at various places through the amp to see what that signal was doing, where it was breaking up or getting lopsided or even getting lost. In this case, we're checking the effects loop, so we want a pretty clean sine wave going all the way through the amp. Of course it's going to get louder, but we're not going to turn things up to the point where things start clipping. We need to get an idea of where everything's at before it clips, so that we can get the cleanest signal going through that effects loop into the effect. So the way that I set this up when I do it is I put all the tone controls at noon. The reason I do that is that's generally where I start when I'm looking for a new tone or trying to adjust my tone, and I want to start from square one. I usually start with all the tone controls at noon. If you're doing this for one of those guys that likes to swipe all the controls all the way to full blast, you might want to adjust your procedure accordingly, with the one exception that you do not want your preamp volumes to be all the way up. You don't want to be doing this, checking this with a clipping signal. You need to check it with a clean sine wave. The master volume is on full. The reason the master volume is on full is because the send into the effect, or not the send, the input into the effects loop comes from your master volume. And so you want to have the maximum signal coming from that into your effects loop. So we turn the master volume up full. Don't confuse the input level to the effects loop with the send level. The input level is the level going into the effects loop. The send level is what you are sending to the effect. And then the return is the signal coming back from the effect and going on to the rest of the amp. As you can see, I'm kind of limited on work surface area in here. One of the things I got planned for the next month or two is to do some renovation down here. With COVID, this is doubling as my office as well. The online ordering systems did something really nice for me a couple months ago. I ordered a pickup, a single pickup humbucker for a guitar, and they shipped it to me in this awesome, wonderful, portable work surface that's disguised as a cardboard box. You know, and no one would ever guess that in a box that big there was a little pickup. The pickup didn't actually come in that box, but it did come in a box about this big. And so I'm just making the point that why? You know, the pickup could have fit in a box this big. Anyway, I've got my USB oscilloscope fired up, running, ready to go. I'm recording the screens, so I'll be able to show you that. Let's just jump into it. Overdrive is out. We don't want to be clipping this, like I said, so we won't be turning the overdrive on at all for this. And I'm doing this through the normal input as opposed to the bright volume input. The reason I'm doing that is the normal input has a little bit more bottom end content, so it's a more robust signal. That's probably going to be the strongest signal going through, and as I said, we want to keep a clean sine wave. I've got the signal generator on the input. I've got one of the probes for my oscilloscope is at the output from the master volume, which is then going into the effects loop. So that's the input level to the effects loop. And I've got one of the other probes is actually on the right now it's on the input, monitoring the sine wave that we're putting in. So if you look at the screen here, I'll bring up this sine wave level. That will be the top, the blue line, the A line. That's the input level. The B line is the level that's going into the effects loop. You'll see that come up, but we'll get there in a minute. And we just want to start bringing up a sine wave into there and get that to about 500 millivolts peak to peak. So, maybe. No, we're at about 300 millivolts peak to peak, and you can see on the input to the effects loop, you can see that sine wave is starting to skew, so it's starting to distort. So we're going to take this back till the input going into the effects loop is more or less still a clean sine wave. We take that back, it's pretty good there. That's about a 250 millivolt peak to peak signal. The sine wave is starting to skew just a little bit, not enough that I'm worried about it. So you can see the blue line are our input sine wave, nice and clean. And you can see on the B line, the sine wave's still pretty clean. And that's the input, the effects loop. I am going to take that back. I'm going to take that back to, it's not super critical. I'm going to take that back to a 200 millivolt peak-to-peak signal. There we go. So now what we want to do, because we're setting this up for a guitar pedal, we're going to want to look at the level that's being sent through the effects loop, and we want to take that down to about a fifth to a tenth of the level to send that out to the effect pedal. The effect pedal is expecting the level of input that a guitar will be putting to it. So we've got right now going into the effects loop, we've got about a 6 volt peak to peak. We want to take that down to about a 600 millivolt for the effect. I'm going to put the effects loop in bypass. You might hear this 1 kilohertz signal, because when I do that, the signal will be going through the amp. I've got the amp going into, plugged into my 2 notes captor 8 for the load. What you'll hear is the driver in there outputting the 1 kilohertz signal. You'll also hear that the fan for the captor 8 comes on. We'll switch the oscilloscope probe. We'll keep the one on the input just so we can see that signal all the time. I'm going to take this probe off, the one sending to the effects loop, and I am going to now take the signal coming out of the send. To do that, I need to plug a patch cable into the send. We've got that in there. And the effects loop is active, and we will just take the probe, and we'll see what our level is on the send. This is the sort of jerry-rigging that you do when you're testing. So I've got the patch cable here. I will connect the hot of the probe right here, make sure that doesn't short anything, and ground. Okay, so we've got that connected, and I have the send level turned all the way down now. So you note on the oscilloscope that B line level is still flat. So we're going to start bringing that level up, and we should start there. We start seeing a sine wave. As I said, we want to have about a fifth to a tenth of the level that is actually being input into the effects loop. So right now we've got the trim on the send set full, so we're getting the full input to the effects loop going through the send, which is about 6.5 volts peak to peak. So I am going to dial this back. Technically you'd want to take this down to about 14 to 20 decibels. It's just easier to do this by going on our peak-to-peak signal here. There we're at 600 millivolts peak-to-peak. Okay, I will adjust the scale here so we can see that sine wave a little more clearly. So you see we still have a pretty nice sine wave, 640 millivolts peak-to-peak. And unfortunately I don't get decibels listed here, so we'll just go with that. So that's a tenth of the signal. That's about the quietest we'd want to send out. Once we get this all set, we may play around with it, and we may take that back up to double that amount, so to about 1.2 volts peak to peak. But right now that's our send level. Now what we want to do is we want this set up so that our return level, the level going to the rest of the amp, is at the same level that it is with the loop bypassed. So how I do this is I'm going to take this patch cable and I'm going to patch it into the return. With this effects loop, if you take a signal from the send, it does not affect the output through the amp. In other words, you can use this as a send to something else, and you don't have to worry about cutting off the signal to the speaker, to the power amp. If I were to just plug a cable into the return, that then breaks the connection between the preamp and power amp effectively, and you would get no output. So by patching this patch cable from the send right through to the return, we can compare that to the bypass level by just switching to bypass. There you can hear the 1 kilohertz signal when I bypass. As soon as I plug this in, you won't hear any, you won't hear that 1 kilohertz signal right now, and that's because I have the the return turned right off. So I'm going to take the oscilloscope probe now, and I'm going to put it on where the return comes in to go to the rest of the amp. So we need to ground this. We can ground it just about anywhere. I'm going to put it on this ground for this this one speaker jack, and then this is a handy spot. This is the return right here from the effects loop. So there I've got the oscilloscope on there. You can see on the oscilloscope we got a little bit of leakage. You can see that yellow line sort of fluctuating, but it's very low, and that's because we've turned the return level down. So what I'm going to do is now take this return level, so we're at about a 6.5 volt peak-to-peak level. And there you can hear the signal start coming in, and you can hear the fan on the Captor 8. And I've got it at about 5 volts peak to peak. I'm going to take it up a little more. You can see we're getting a little bit of effect from the effect loop on that sine wave. It's not quite a perfectly clean sine wave. This is a guitar amp, so that doesn't matter that much. That's a pretty good sine wave for a guitar amp, really. Those of you who will bias an amp by using the oscilloscope method would say, well, you probably got some crossover distortion there. We're not looking at the output tubes. We're still looking at the output technically of the preamp. I've got that set to 6.35 volts. So what I can do is I can flip the bypass, and we'll see what happens to that sine wave and to that peak-to-peak level. It should be pretty close. We want to keep it so that bypassed and engaged, we're still getting the same peak-to-peak level. So with the effect loop in, we're at about 6.5 volts peak-to-peak. I bypass it, and we're down about 5.8 volts peak-to-peak. So I'm going to engage this again, and I'm going to take that return level down, so I'm at about 5.8, 5.9 volts peak-to-peak. You don't have to be too exact. 100 millivolts here or there at this point is probably not going to be audible. You can fine tune this by ear after, and I'll show you how to do this whole thing by ear without using the equipment anyway. But there we are. We've got the loop engaged. We're at 5.872 volts peak to peak on the return. If I bypass the effects loop, we're at 5.872 as well. It's fluctuating a little bit. You can also tell, I'll be really quiet here, you might hear this 1 kilohertz signal. I will switch the effects loop back in. If you can hear that signal, just listen to it, and then listen for the click when I bypass the effects loop, and you probably won't notice much change in that level. So here we go. You'll hear the fan and the 1 kilohertz signal. So not any real change in level. The effects loop is bypassed now. I'll flip it back in. So we have the same signal level before and after the effects loop now. So we're not going to get a jump when we put our effect in. You can see on the oscilloscope the sine wave is still, like I say, it's skewed a little bit. Oh, one thing I wanted to point out when you watch this, I'll flip this out again. The effects loop it's a tube buffered effects loop. So every time you go through a single tube stage, your signal is inverted or is phase reversed. So what you'll see when I flip this to bring the effects loop back in, you will see that sine wave. It might be going like this. So it starts, well, in this case, when you look at it, it's starting at the bottom, going up, and then around like this. When I flip it, what you'll see is it will reverse that. It will go up and then down. So rather than starting at the near the bottom and going like this. It will start near the top and go like this, and that's because it's reversing the phase of the signal. So here it is bypassed. Now you watch that yellow line. I'll engage it. You'll hear the click, and there you can see it. Everything looked like it shifted over half a waveform. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about that. That is normal. That's how tubes work. So I'll switch it out again, and then back in. Like I say, all tube stages will phase reverse your signal like that. We have this effects loop calibrated. Let's just, for grins, let's see what happens when we put a pedal in that effects loop instead of the patch cable. So again, what I was saying about putting something into the return, cutting the preamp, the connection between the preamp and power amp. What I'll do is I'll unplug from the send here, and you'll see that this fan and this 1 kilohertz signal will turn off. There you go, right? And as soon as I unplug the return, that automatically bypasses the effects loop, so you will hear the signal come back as soon as I unplug the return. And there you go. I have that TC Electronic the profit delay. So now I've got that patched in. We'll turn the signal back on. And again, you can see on the oscilloscope, we've got our sine waves. We're still monitoring the return signal. That TC Electronic is in its bypass mode now. I'm going to switch it in. Let's see what happens to the sine wave. Okay, nothing really, which is what we expect. There is a little bit of delay dialed in, but not much. And I think you saw the wave react. There it's out. And when I click it in, you'll just see the wave just kind of jitter a little bit. And that's because the delay is activated, but it's not at a very high level. But our audio or our sine wave levels didn't change very drastically anyway. So not a very exciting thing to look at, but you just see that it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break right now. I'm going to load all of this footage down, and then I'm going to, oh, that's a pretty high signal level there. I'm going to load all of this, take all of this footage into my computers, and then I'll be back and I'll show you how this sounds right now, the way we've got it set up, and then we'll play around with it a little by ear and see how we would fine tune this. Before I show you how to do this whole thing by ear, since we have this already set up, let's see how it sounds when we just did it by looking at pictures on a scope. So here's the sound without, here's the tone without anything in the effects loop at all, and the effects loop is bypassed. So. I'm going into the Triwatt. I have all the controls set where we had them set when we were calibrating this, because we want to be testing this with a clean sound. So all the tones are straight up. Master volume's on full. I'm into the link, but I've only got the normal preamp turned up, and it's at about 10 o'clock-ish. Overdrive's out, bright volume's down. This is going out of the Triwatt. It's going into my 2 Notes Captor 8 as a load, and then I'm going direct out of the Captor 8 XLR into my Focusrite 2i2. So here's the clean signal. FX loop completely bypassed, nothing plugged into it. So that's the clean sound. Okay, so I've plugged the TC Electronic back into the loop. The loop is bypassed, so even when I turn it on, you don't hear it. But let's engage the effects loop. Okay, so here's the effects loop with the delay. So you can hear it. The delay's there, good level. Okay, I will bypass it right now. So, and what I mean by bypass, I have not bypassed the loop, but I have bypassed the pedal. And why we're going to do that is because I will show you again, same test we did earlier. I will play and then I will bypass the loop, and we don't want to see a change in our level. So there we are. And bypass it. So it's pretty close. I think that the return might be a little bit low. But what we want to do now is I want to show you how to do this, this same thing by ear. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pedal out of the loop. Oops. And promptly drop a cable, so I have to go back here. There we go. Oh, let's drop both of them, okay? All right, so I've got everything taken out of the effects loop now. As I said, the effects loop automatically bypasses if nothing's plugged into the return. So even though the effects loop switch is engaged, we're going straight through. Changing the switch doesn't change much. It rolls off a little bit of high end, and that's to be expected. We're going through more circuitry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the return all the way back off and the send all the way off. So we have the send and return all the way off. There we go. So when I engage the loop with the send and return turned down, we're not getting any signal through. We can adjust things even without using any cables or anything. We've just got the probe. I'm going to turn the send all the way up, and we'll see what that gives us when we bring up the return. So the send is all the way up. We still won't have any signal because return is off. So let's take the return up. Now we'll start taking that up. And there you go. We get return. I've had to turn it very little because the send is up full. You can also hear with the send up full like that, we're getting some crunch that we weren't getting before. If I bypass this, you will see that the signal level is going to be quieter, and it will be clean. So now if I bring the effects loop back in, you'll hear some crunch. It's also going to probably clip Logic over here recording the direct signal. So yes, it did clip Logic, and you're hearing that kind of ugly clipping. You know, it's okay, but it's not really what we're looking for. So let's take this back so that we're not getting that clipping. So So just by ear, again, scope would tell us a little bit more, but that is telling us that we're getting some pretty heavy clipping. One of the things that they suggest in the documentation for the effects loop is set the send so that it's at about 3 o'clock. So I've just put it roughly there. Let me just check. And yeah, I'll set it to about 3 o'clock. And I won't punch the guitar too hard, but hard enough to see if we get clipping still. So we're still getting a little crunch there. And again, we've got a clean set and we don't want it crunching right now. There's nothing wrong with driving this over if you like that sound, but you won't get a very clean sound when you want one. That might still be a little crunchy. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to roll this back. I've got the send at about 1 o'clock right now. See where we are. And it might be that I've got the return set a little too high. So let's take that just so we get signal here. This is going to be a little quiet, but I want to see if I'm getting any crunching. No, so that's pretty clean. So we've got the return set just so we're getting signal. I'm going to take this send up so it's pointing right at about 3 o'clock, like they recommend in the documentation. And let's see if we're getting any crunch out of it. No, we're getting a pretty clean sound. We bypass, we're getting a little more level. So I'm going to leave the send set at 3 o'clock, and I'm going to now bring up that return so that when I bypass the effects loop, we get approximately the same level. It's a little quiet right now. I'm just going to take that up a bit. I've got that pointing at about 10 o'clock right now. Let's see what that does for us. Okay, yeah, we've got way too much there. So I'm going to bring this so the return is pointing about 9 o'clock. So I've got the return pointing 9 o'clock, my 9 o'clock, and I've got the send pointing at 3 o'clock, my 3 o'clock. Let's see if we're getting any distortion out of this and what our level is like. So yeah, we might still be a little bit hot. I'm going to take this back a little bit. It's really quite sensitive. There we go. A pretty clean signal. I've got the send, like I say, 3 o'clock. Return is actually about 8:30. It's still almost at 9 o'clock. It's really sensitive in there. So you're definitely going to want to play around with this and get it where you like it. Again, I'm setting it up with a pedal. At the end of the day, to be honest, I probably won't use the effects loop too much. I just wanted to put it in there in case I wanted it, and it's something else to put in with something else to work on. So that was good. None of my other amps that I use regularly have a built-in effects loop, and I really like to try and keep things simple. If I get something really great using this effects loop, then I'll make that exception. But what I really want to be able to do is slot my amp heads into my rig without changing too much else. I want to get the flavor of the amp, but I don't want to have to rejig everything every time I switch amps. So at the end of the day, I probably won't use this effects loop much. At any rate, we've got that return set to, I think, a good level. And I'm playing chunky. I'm playing a little harder, not as light as I would, because I want to see what if we're getting any clipping, any audible clipping. At a certain point, you might be getting clipping but not hearing it, and that's okay. You can cheat a little bit. I'm going into my Focusrite 2i2. I can watch the indicator, input indicator on there. We're staying in the green, staying green. But in Logic in particular, I can see what my level input is here. So with the effects loop engaged, and nothing's in the effects loop right now, what I can do is I can play and I can look and see what sort of level I'm putting into Logic. So that's minus 6.3 right there. So if I do the same test with the effects loop bypassed, and we're minus 6.5, essentially the same level. So by ear, that's pretty well balanced. And that's basically as simple as it is to do this. Now, let's put this pedal in and see how it sounds. Let's pedal in there. I'll have the pedal itself bypassed. We'll go switch the effects loop in and out, see what if that does anything. It should be the same. And then we'll activate the delay again. And then I'll talk a little bit about the differences if you decided to put a 4 dBu, a studio processor in this effects loop. We aren't doing that today. Like I say, the procedure's more or less the same. You just need to change your send and return levels a bit. I've got the effect loop bypassed. Now I'll switch the effects loop in, but the pedal is still bypassed. Same. Let's put the delay in, see how the delay sounds. What we expect. So it's sounding nice. I promise I'm going to do the features demonstration. I'll do that over in the studio. I'll take some time and prepare a piece rather than just kind of noodling and doing the ham-handed thing I'm doing right now. And give you a real look at what this amp sounds like. You know, I did the first playthrough, and that was really, I just slotted it in, dialed up a sound really quick, and played. I didn't really tailor anything. So now that I have the amp dialed and it is done, I'm going to button it up. It'll stay buttoned up now at least for 6 months, if not permanently. I think it's all exactly where I would like it. So the next one of the next videos I'll be doing, probably not next week, maybe the week after. So around pretty close to the end of June, I should have the features video done. And what I will do in that one is some clean tones, clean chords, clean soloing, a little bit of crunch soloing, and then some high gain and high gain soloing. And I will be using my effects and other things as well, basically running this amp through its paces the way I would be using it for a gig or recording. So that's coming up. Like I say, this is kind of the ham-fisted version. So we've got the pedal in there. It's working. Everything's sounding good. It's not giving us ugly tones. It's not giving us, a quiet signal when we switch it in and out. So again, the delay here. Switch it out. It should sound the same, just no delay. And there we go. We'll talk a little bit about what you would do to put a a studio level effect in here. So what we've got here right now, I've got the send level at about 9 o'clock, and the return level is, or at about 3 o'clock, and the return level is just under 9 o'clock. If I were putting a studio level effect in here, it would need it would be expecting a more robust signal into it. So I would be taking that that send level up higher. As a matter of fact, I suspect, if I get around to doing it, I might do another follow-up video about this. But if I put a studio level effect in there, I probably would have that send probably pretty close to cranked, and the return might go down even farther, because the studio effect would be expecting to see a much stronger signal coming in. So looking at this right now with the send at 9 o'clock, and full is actually at about, or sorry, at 3 o'clock, and full is at about 5 o'clock, a little past 5 o'clock. I think that send would be pretty close to full wound out, and then the return may or may not have to take that up or down depending on the output of that effect. Another thing you can do with those kind of effects, they themselves have some circuitry built in so that you can adjust your input and output levels. I would feed it the strongest level I could from the effects loop, and then coming out of the unit, I might actually take the output down a little bit so I could get that return level a little higher. Again, it's another thing you'd have to play around with. You could do it on a scope or whatever your ears tells you sounds best. So that's where we're at. The effects loop is done. We're ready to go. I'm ready to play with this amp and you know, put something together to really show you what it can do. Sometime after that, like I say, I've talked about this quite a few times now, I will be doing a shootout. This amp to my high watt, this amp to the two amps that I have built, designed and built, that I use quite frequently, the Pistolino and the Jagster. These are not apples to apples comparisons of amps, but I'll go through them. I'll set them all clean, see how they compare. Set them all crunchy, see how they compare. Set them all high gain, see how they compare. And then actually put my effects through them and just see, you know, what are the differences between these things. It's going to be a pretty close comparison between the Triwatt and my high watt. And even the Pistolino is similar. It's more JTM 45-ish, but it's simlar. The Jagster is the outlier on that one. The Jagster is about an 8-watt amp. It's a single-ended amp. It can take 6V6, 6L6, EL34s, KT88s. I have one with a KT88 right now, one with a 6V6. So I might use both of those in the shootout. So that's a lower wattage amp. So, you know, getting similar sounds out of it would mean that would be a much quieter signal. So balance all of that, and we basically we'll just compare tones of those amps. Like I say, I don't know if I'll do that all in one video, or maybe it makes the most sense to do a Triwatt high watt shootout, and then just do a run through with the Pistolino, Jagster, high watt, and Triwatt. Just like I say, comparing similar sounds. So, like always, like and subscribe, please, if you enjoyed this or found it entertaining. Check out my band, One Soul Thrust. The links are in the description below, as always. And I really appreciate you being here and sticking with me through this. We'll get on to a different subject soon. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for watching.